Right, so today I'm going to talk about taxonomies and what we mean by that. But I think, first of all, I'd like to say a thank you to Crypto Compare for this opportunity. We're actually working together on a cryptocurrency taxonomy, and hopefully we'll be able to show you some of that as part of this presentation. So to start with, though, I think I will bring in some headlines and look at some of the issues that are facing people in the crypto area. So my first question I want to pose is, was the lack of transparency complicit in the 2008 financial crisis? And the quote I've got there is from Julie Tett from the Financial Times, and she says that a lack of risk, there was a lot of risk taking and there was a lot of debt that was being concealed, but only the people in the bankers actually understood those products. And I'd actually quite argue with that a little bit. I'd say that a lot of the people in the banking industry didn't understand the products. Sorry. I must remember not to move my arm. Oh, is it still working? Okay. And what I mean by that is that there's actually a small number of people within the financial institutions that actually really truly understand the nuances between the different products. And I'm not talking about the mathematics behind it. In theory, I can understand the workings of an internal combustion engine without having to understand the formulas behind explaining the reaction. So it is that we should be able to define financial instruments in the same way. So what does this mean from a crypto point of view? So is a lack of understanding and clarity in the crypto area responsible for some of the recent headlines? And these are just some headlines I pulled out from the internet for this week. So for example, is a case that people don't understand the drivers that pushes Bitcoin price skyrockets? Is that an issue because they don't really understand what's driving that significant move? Is it a case that people can't easily differentiate between crypto assets that means they're open to scams and therefore will suffer accordingly? So what does this mean from the regulatory point of view in terms of what are the regulatory implications likely to be? So here's a quote from Mark Carney. He's talking about saying that cryptocurrency exchanges are to face a regulatory clampdown, says the Bank of England, Mark Carney. So we know regulation is coming, it's inevitable. The question is, from anybody who's working in this space, especially if you're an exchange, it's like, how do I know I'm being compliant? In all of this confusion, this fast-paced market, it's very dynamic. How do I know that what the rules are and that I'm actually adhering to them all? So in this session, we're going to talk about our taxonomy solution, but first of all, before we can explain that, we need to understand what a taxonomy is. We're also going to take a look at hierarchies that are masquerading as taxonomies, and then we'll have a look at regulatory compliance in terms of how we can leverage a taxonomy to help us in that field. To do this, I'm going to start with a case study. Now this is based on real events. I've changed the character names to protect their identity, but it is based on real examples in a compliance world. So as we're talking about markets, well, it's usually the domain of the mathematicians, so we'll say the quants, and we're going to start with, I think this piece is a bit slow, talking about one of the characters here. Oh, that's fine. So first of all, we're going to talk about what is exactly a taxonomy. So let's start with that definition. And an easy way to do that is that we can just ask Siri, so we're going to do that now. Siri, what is the definition of a taxonomy? Hopefully, if you can't find the signal, it would come up with something like this. So it's a branch of science concerned with classification, and the important point I'm trying to make here is that it's a scheme of classification, and that is crucial when you're talking about taxonomies, and we'll see why as we go through the presentation. So to explore this a bit further, I'm going to mention a case study. We're talking about people in the market space, so one of the characters I'm going to talk about is a lady called Sarah. Thank you. Yes. Finally made it. So this is Sarah. She works as a quant. She's tasked with defining a taxonomy for all the market products, and being that she's mathematically minded, in her mind it's all about the mathematics, to the degree that if you're trying to ask her about products that she understands very well, she'll also say sometimes that you wouldn't understand it unless you understood the maths, which doesn't help us. And during her computation, she comes up with a eureka idea which she thinks will change everything. Meanwhile, Eric, who is going to appear shortly, is a compliance officer, and he's tasked with trying to understand the regulations and how they relate and impact his business area. So I think it's a little bit slow drawing. Here we go. So he's got quite a difficult task to both interpret the regulations, understand the impact to the business, and then propose changes in terms of what we need to introduce as restrictions. And then the last point he has to do is inform those people who are likely to be impacted or business areas being impacted. So to do his task, the taxonomy isn't ready yet, so he thinks, I'm just going to do a search. I'll search for the items that I'm particularly interested in. So off he goes. He's going to search for all the products that he thinks are being impacted by a new regulation that he's currently investigating. So he starts his search. The problem is, as we've probably heard in some of the other talks, is that there isn't a standard terminology. Even the naming convention for products is very different. So he doesn't even know what to start with in terms of identifying what to type in. And he searched, what he finds is it brings back an avalanche of irrelevant materials. So he finds meeting notes, he finds some documentation on some of the products, but it certainly isn't comprehensive. So one of the problems that a lot of compliance people are facing, and anybody who's interested in finding about products, will be the following. So we have no naming convention for the products. Everyone within even the same business area can use different terminology, even to describe the same product. There's no single source of product information he can go to. So when he was doing his search, he couldn't just go to a particular portal or anything. He just had to do an organisation-wide search, and it's difficult to confirm therefore what the coverage is. Has he confirmed for all the business areas and identified everywhere that's been impacted? Not very helpful. So his next point of call is to speak to one of the business managers. He's going to phone a friend and speak to Simon. Now Simon works as a business manager in one of the areas, and when it comes up, hopefully, here he goes. So Simon, he goes, can you please provide me with your list of products? Sounds fine. They must have a list, and he'll go across each of the different desks and business areas to ask for that. So this is the first time we start to see a hierarchy. If you're in capital markets, you tend to be organised, your list should be quite familiar. So they tend to be organised by asset class. And here we see commodities, fixed income, and foreign exchange, and Simon works in fixed income, so he kindly supplies his list. But what we find is that the actual products actually can appear in multiple places. So one of the dangers there is that you may not treat those products in the same way from a compliance point of view, especially if you didn't know that product was already being used. And consequently, when there was a restructuring, a lot of those mappings went and they had to redo them all. The danger with that as well is that some products which you have mapped for that business area may no longer be valid in terms of, because they've introduced new products, perhaps because they've merged teams. So it's certainly not an ideal situation. So just to recap, issues with with the org chart. Product appears multiple times, so it's not a classification system for that reason. The restructuring is really, it's really an org chart showing the ownership of the product. Risk of treating products differently, especially if they're used by different business areas. And the last place was we could accidentally move the products into the incorrect business area. So he's got another friend, Rian, in IT, and he proposes a decision tree. So we'll have a look at that. Decision trees are typically used for product finder type applications, which sounds ideal because that's exactly what you want to do, find the products. And typically they're in an if then else kind of scenario. So depending on your answers to certain questions, you follow a particular path through the tree structure and arrive at your outcome, i.e. a particular product. Sounds reasonable, sounds like we're on the right path. However, decision trees, they are notoriously difficult to maintain. An IT department I worked with that were using a decision tree would quote a turnaround of 3 weeks to add a single product to their taxonomy using this structure. Partly because you have to reevaluate all the questions, you have to make sure you can still validly find the other products that were there originally, and the whole process just takes a lot of testing and a lot of time to implement. You also have to traverse the entire structure in order to get to your product. It's used for product finder applications like we saw. Usually it's specific then to a business area. So again, you're not going to get complete coverage because it's only focused on a small part of the business. And the other problem with the product finder aspect is that it focuses on client needs, not the features of the product, but what the client's looking for. So again, it's not helping us classify the product itself. So, is a taxonomy just another hierarchy? No. As we said earlier, it's actually a classification system. So what do we mean by that? Typically when you start with hierarchies, there's a couple of ways you can build them. So you might come down top down, but often when people are trying to look at taxonomies using this approach, they get stuck in the middle layers because they kind of get, oh, we could go at this branch, or should we split these groups out? So we merge these groups, and it becomes overly complicated. What you need to do from a taxonomy point of view is really turn it on its head. Not worry about how many layers your taxonomy has in terms of levels, but just focus on the thing you're trying to classify, in this case a product. So here we've got, see if this pointer works. No, it doesn't work on that. Does it work on this one? No. So here we've got the product is the middle layer. I'll just point to it. So these are all products. They belong to a single family. That's key, because the idea is that the product's going to inherit the attributes from the family. So all these products share the same number of attributes, and that's why it can only be in one place, because it's inheritance. So it is meeting that rule. The values of those features can be different, and that gives us a unique fingerprint for that product. So this helps us distinguish one product from another. Okay. So effectively what we are pulling out here is the DNA of the product. Oh, sorry about that, must move my arm. And the main key point is there can be only one. It can only appear in one place. So just to recap, a taxonomy in terms of its rules is a classification first and foremost. Bear in mind those other hierarchies we looked at were performing different roles. Not to say they were wrong, it's just they weren't classifying the products in the way we needed it. A product can appear only once. The focus is solely on the product. Whoops. So it went a bit quick on that one. Okay, I'll just let it play through. So as it zoom past, I'll just reiterate the last few points. So the focus is solely on the product, and it's agnostic to the organisation, unlike the org chart. So the idea here is that we could lift the entire taxonomy out and plant it into a different organisation, completely agnostic. So from a crypto point of view, this is just a snippet of the taxonomy we're working on, and these are families that we've called out, and you start to see some of the features of those families. And the point of showing you this is that we can start to see the differences between the families in terms of features that they actually have. So for example, on the collectible side, you have this concept of a digital type, and it can be one of these things, and it has this concept of uniqueness, being it's non-unique or it's individually unique. You wouldn't see this kind of feature in some of the other families. So it's not a case that somebody can accidentally go, I think I've got a collectible, or I think I've got a cryptocurrency, and trying to put it into that group. It enforces the rules because it has to have those kind of features, otherwise it doesn't belong there, and that's crucial. So we get away from the problem of trying to shoehorn something into a classification where it doesn't really belong. The other beauty of this approach is that clearly the taxonomy will evolve over time, and when we have something that doesn't match any of those families, then we know we've got something completely new and we've never seen it before. And that's fine, because all we do is we go about to finding what that new object or crypto asset is. Okay, so remember Sarah at the beginning and her Eureka idea. So the quant came up, it was about 10 months and 23 days later, she discovered that you had only 43 attributes that would allow you to define any equity product. The problem was, had she actually defined any equity products? And the answer was no. Now the issue for Sarah was that being a product quant, she was probably too close to the details of the product and probably couldn't see the wood through the trees. And consequently, she didn't know what to leave out of the definition. She kind of included everything. And so had she tried to do some definition, she probably would have seen that some of those features just didn't belong in there. So she was on the right path. It was just a case of she kind of got too bogged down into the details. So where does this leave Eric? He's still trying to do his compliance. So why build a taxonomy if they're this difficult? So the answer to this question is, it's all about the patterns. And you think, well, what does she mean by that? So we're talking about patterns of features here. Once we've got a taxonomy, we've already seen that we can distinguish between the different assets, but we can actually leverage that information in lots of different ways. And to show you that, I'll show you a bit of a demonstration. Actually, I didn't need to come out of that, did I? So this is PyAxiom. PyAxiom is a cloud-based solution. It's and being cloud-based, it'll actually work on your phone as well. So it works on multiple. So that's it working on the phone, showing me the same sort of product offering. It's encrypted and it's quite secure. Now you'll notice at the moment it's showing me asset class again, because this was initially, we had some market example data in here, but this is not the taxonomy. This is because people using this product would want to say, I work on the FX desk, so I want to go in via that route. So it's helping them navigate to the products, but it's not the taxonomy. The taxonomy sits over here, and we'll have a quick look at that. So this is again some of the different groups we've got at the top. Now you notice asset class doesn't appear anywhere on here. It will appear in terms of some of the features of products. So we go down the crypto one, as we're talking about crypto. At the top we've defined it into fungible and non-fungible. So here we'll go down that path and we'll have a look at cryptocurrencies. Okay, so what we're seeing here is a selection of kind of features. The ones that tend to be multiple select like this is what we call a non-distinguishing feature. So we'd be saying this one was like, what can you use it for? Yes, it can be used for these kind of things, but it doesn't really help define it, but it is certainly useful to know that it can do those things. The ones that tend to be defining are the ones that kind of like a single like supply. It can only be capped or uncapped, it can't be both. Okay, so here's a list of features. What we can do at this point is look for products that have those kind of features. And hopefully it will scroll down. And there we've got some in there. And if I was in Eric at this point, I might want to then say, okay, that's great. I've identified products that are going to impact this particular regulation, and I can go ahead and enter a regulation and stipulate some details. So let's just do that. So this one's going to be a UK reg. So I'm going to say UK retail protection. Okay, I'll give it an acronym, so I'll just call it UK RET. For UK retail, I'll give it a start date. Oops, hopefully it'll give me that start date. Start date, so from today. Right, that's fine. And I'll just put it for a little period in the past, because regulations do expire, so it's useful to know that it might expire. We can do this by country, but I'm going to do it by or region. So I'm going to say United Kingdom. Here we go. Now, I'll just point out, here is a little code, a pattern. And what we've done in the taxonomy, if people are familiar with the ISO standard, ISO CFI, Classification of Financial Instruments, where they do a similar technique of taking particular features and values for those features and assigning them a letter, and it generates a 6-character code. We're doing something similar here. Our code is much bigger, but that's basically what it did was it picked it up from the taxonomy that this is what this regulation is likely to be targeting. We can then put in some information about the regulator. So it's UK, so I'll say it's financial product, and then I'll submit that. So that's created a regulation. Now I want to perhaps go and add a control to it. So here you can see it's picked up the same code. I can say the control is for retail clients must issue a fact sheet. Clients issue fact sheet, something like that. Oops, I still can't type. Okay, so the control category, we'll say that this is compliance, it's not. The other categories could be eligibility, operational, procedural, those kind of things. So eligibility is a good one because we can use that later on when people in the sales team are targeting certain clientele, and we can say this particular product isn't really suitable for them, or the client themselves has to meet this criteria. But here we're just going to say it's procedural, and I'm going to call out there, it's part of this regulation I just created, and then I'll submit that. Okay, so you'll see how we're leveraging the use of the features, not just having a portal where we've got information we can go into and find out about the product. We're actually using this concept of the taxonomy to map features that are unique to certain products and map them to a regulation or map it to a control. And we can also see examples where we mapped it to the target market. So if I go back into my catalogue, you can search for names like I can put was it Zcash up here if I wanted to, and it would find that. But because we're interested in the fundable ones, I'm going to put in the code instead. So I'll put that. It'll find the code. Okay, now what I want to do is a UK regulation, so it should only appear if I'm selling this in the UK. So Bitcoin is being sold in the UK, and I can go show more. And it gives me a bit of blurb about what Bitcoin is. it says, now that's the code that's been generated, so that's its full code based on the features that this product has. And this here are those list of features that we've called out. And these, these themselves are searchable. So you can search for these, they're a bit like a hashtag. You can search for them as a term and say, I want to find everything that has a supply that's capped, for example. So that's its unique fingerprint. And here we have the regulation and control. So we say for retail clients, this is what the restriction is. And we can see the countries it's being allowed to trade in, and these are some of the currencies. So that's great. How do I know it's working in that regard in terms of what about other products that are also sold in the UK? Will they pick up that coin? So there is one that's in the UK. I think it's, if I look for the CryptoKitty one, so it'd be percent. So I can code on this one. Oh, it's not interesting, but you'll see that it wouldn't pick up. We're going to use another example for CryptoKitty in a minute. So again, it hasn't got any regulations, this one at the moment. So, and it wouldn't pick it up because it's not being sold in the area. Sorry, I wish I could move this. Move it around to the front a bit more. Right, so you can see how it's only giving you the information based on two things: the jurisdiction of where you're actually selling it. So when you start selling it into that area, it will start to look for regulations that match, and then likely then it's taking the pattern of features and looking for regulations or controls that have been set at that level. Okay, we can just do one more example. I think we've got enough time, so we go back to.
Do you have time for questions?
We will have time for questions in a minute. Yeah. So I'm just going to go back. I'm going to look for products, and I'll just do the one example. So I can go back into here, the taxonomy. I'm going to look for, in terms, this time I'm going to go down the non-fundable route, look at collectibles. I'll find, hopefully I'll see the product there. So I want to do the same thing here, create a regulation. This is going to be for Oz. So Oz, unique. Right, okay, and I'm just going to, I'll skip the acronym. So I'm going to put the dates in. I'll put it there. Right, the country, again, is going to be Australia. Okay, and then I'll set that up, a regulator. Financial, okay, fine. So we set this up. Now I want to go and actually create a control again. Where was that? There's a hotspot here, so we'll pick that up. So here we're going to put in, say, ensure unique. Right, okay, and I'm going to choose the category. It's compliance again. The regulation is the one we just added. There it is. And you can see the product, it's calling out that it thinks it's going to be impacted. The reason why I've done another one is because I want to go back to the product and just show you how, just because it's in Australia, it won't be picked up by all the products. So if we go back to our example of fundables, percent. I know that, I think it's cash is Japan, right, Ripple's Australia. No, Bitcoin's Australia. Okay, so we're going to have a look at Bitcoin again. And we'll notice here that the regulation doesn't come up because it doesn't match those features. One quick other use of this, I'll just quickly show you, is from a sales point of view. We mentioned this is like for, based on sort of MiFID, target market characteristics. I can look for something that provides financing and click OK. It will look for cross-structured strategies and components, and then it gives me an example here, and the blue highlights again restrictions from an eligibility point of view. So they must be knowledgeable, advanced or expert. Okay, so that's kind of just what I wanted to show you from a demonstration point of view. If you go back to the point here, let me just play that. Come on, back. So you can see how we're leveraging patterns, and this should make it a lot easier for anybody in compliance to identify regulations that are impacting. And as we said, the taxonomy will not necessarily be complete, but it is a good framework from which we can identify ones that which are new that we've not seen before. Okay, so what does this give us in terms of benefits? I'll just quickly show you this. So there's a bit of blurb in terms of some of the other cases that it covers, but what we can see is that we've got enhanced accuracy in finding products because we're using a clearly defined terminology. What underpins all of this is a well-defined glossary, and just go back a bit. Some of the other benefits are that we can easily identify new products that don't fit the mould yet, and so we can identify new assets as they come out. We've got a glossary of terms, so we're standardising on the language here. It's shareable. We can share this information via a feed or via an API. It should reduce compliance costs. We can see the cross-selling opportunities by offering products that map particular client needs, and we can also generate things like keys and the ISO CFI code. Okay, so I think because we're almost out of time, I'll throw open the point to questions.
Okay, yeah, we'll go with you first.
Give the mic to the lady first, please.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. My question is PyAxiom publicly available?